name is Paolo Margherita, and today we are talking of what it seems to be the most difficult exercise for pilots: intercepting a radial. Should it be that difficult? Well, apparently it is, but if you're interested in the topic, well, join me into my pilot lounge.
Before starting our topic talking about intercepting radials, first of all, I shall remind you that there is a disclaimer video. So please make sure that you are familiar with the contents of the disclaimer video so that you know how to use and how to interpret what is being said on my videos. Now, this video is linked here. If you're familiar with what it has been said there, well, let's continue with this topic: intercepting radial. One of the main reasons why pilot fails assessment. But what makes me say is difficult exercise? Most of the pilots say, well, this is very simple. Yeah, it should be, absolutely, it should be very simple. But as a matter of fact, when it comes to assessments, one of the main reasons why pilots fail a hiring, so a company screening, company entry assessment, but one of the reasons is lack of knowledge of basic IFR. What is even more, I would say, surprising to me is that very often I see pilots that they're convinced they're very good in basic IFR, and when it comes to actually taking a chart in your hands and interpreting what the chart says and fly it in conventional navigation on an aircraft, even a relatively simple and slow aircraft, well, those pilots are unable to fly a conventional arrival, a conventional procedure, an approach without the use of the FMS or the GPS. So they were convinced they were good in doing that. Well, the question is, well, shouldn't you realize by yourself that you are unable to fly a conventional procedure? Do you really need to get to the stage of the assessment to realize that you cannot manage to switch from one radial to the other, so to leave on a radial and intercept an ILS or stuff like that? Well, apparently this is the problem that many pilots has. We must also say that when you do an assessment, it's very rare that there is one reason why you fail the assessment. Well, it be that there is a specific reason why the pilot failed, but very often there are different areas being assessed, there are different items being assessed, and very often it's not just one item. Because if it would be one item, the training department of that company could fix it easily. But then they say, okay, there is one item that has to be fixed. And then they go forward and say, okay, there is another item that, but not really happy with that. Then they go forward and say, okay, there is another item there. And then eventually there's 2 or 3 elements that brings the company and say, okay, we're not going to hire this pilot. But as I just said, among these reasons, very often it's 1 chance over 3 that if you don't pass an assessment, among these reasons, lack of basic IFR. The question now is, yes, but why? Companies are paying so much attention in basic IFR. Why they're not paying this attention in other items? For example, it's very rare that companies start asking specific questions about PBN, about certification of RNAV and RMP. So why instead there's a lot of, it's a systematic request that pilots go through basic IFR. And I can tell you this because I've been running assessments for many companies, and the request was a common from all companies. That's every company is looking for something, but I can tell you the common request I always have every time we have to run to an assessment is, well, give the pilot at least, at the very least, an IFR procedure, a standard arrival procedure, a conventional procedure. That is the very least request. Then some companies might insist a little bit more on the CRM. Some companies might insist a little bit more on the handling of the aircraft. Well, this depends on the companies, of course, but that is a common request, basic IFR. Well, the question remains, why the companies are paying attention so much to the basic IFR? Well, let's jump into the Aviomar simulator of the 737 and let's give a quick look of what it means pilots that blindly believe or they blindly follow the magenta line. Good. In this video, the first video you're seeing, we have a departure from Dublin, and the departure from Dublin is outbound to an NDB. The name is Oscar Echo, and we have to leave the NDB on the 019 track. Okay, so it's very easy, fairly simple, and even simpler because it's loaded in the FMC. We depart, and as you can see in the turn, now we find out that the FMC fails. Here we go. That's the picture of FMC failure. Pilot lose the magenta line, but the pilot actually selected the NDB. You see that there is the blue arrow pointing on the NDB. So it simply is sufficient to switch on the conventional navigation, and you can now follow the conventional navigation. I would say this is a very easy departure to manage. Why easy? Well, because the pilot is well aware of what's going on. The FMC disappeared completely, so that is an FMC failure, and we need to find another source of reference for navigation. But that is not always the case. Well, let's take this second video. I actually inserted in the FMS a map shift. Now, to make it evident, I inserted quite an important map shift, okay? As you can see, we are in the approach. The aircraft is turning and final. All of a sudden, the runway moves away from the position. This should ring the bell to the pilot that there is definitely something wrong. How is it possible that the center line is moving away that fast? Well, as a matter of fact, the FMS attempt to regain the magenta line, and what I asked to my student, of course, is to trust the magenta line anyway to get back on the route. As you can see on this video, we got back on the route, and we're now aligned with the final. And what is very interesting is that now I'll take the camera, there's a bit of movement, but I'm trying to point with the laser pointer. The runway should be just in front of us. Instead, if we look outside, what we find out that in front of us is the city of Dublin. And actually, the Dublin city center is on the right-hand side. The Dublin city center is in front of us. The airport is on the left-hand side. Now the laser is pointing at the airport. It's not easy to see because it's very far away in this case. But as a matter of fact, this is just to underline that there is no correspondence between what the FMS says and the position of the runway. So in this case is a map shift, and actually if you know the 737, you can say yes, there was a lack of RNP, of required navigation performance, and that is absolutely true. That lack of performance was indicated. But these are the reasons that brings the company to assess, to be so strict in having the pilot aware of their position, aware of the usage of the conventional navigation. Why? Because the area navigation system are extremely precise, but it's not so uncommon to have problems in path definition, to have problems in accuracy of the navigation. And those problems, I would say, are, although rare, are still happening, and is one of the major causes in the pilot loss of position awareness. And that's what makes companies concerned, okay? Just to give you an example, there has been an operator that had simply an FMS problem. The database was incorrectly coded out of Madrid. Something around 20 crew flew that departure in that day, where the new database was coming in incorrectly coded. And out of those 20 crew, there were 10 crews that actually flew the wrong track. Now, Madrid has a lot of obstacles. Now, that was just a lucky day that the wrong track didn't take the crew over the obstacles. But as a matter of fact, approximately 50% of the crew that went on the wrong way, they had a fine for noise infringement in Madrid, which is not that cheap, just 20,000 euros of fine if you do a noise infringement. So, of course, that operator wasn't really happy of these kind of things happening, okay? There's been other events like in Los Angeles where a point was simply miscoded. A north coordinate was confused with a south coordinate, so the point was completely somewhere else. And well, still the aircraft departing actually engaged their nav without realizing the problem, and they cause a track deviation, potentially conflict of traffic, which is a potential mid-air collision, TCAS warning, and everything that comes with that. In Los Angeles, one of the most busiest airspace on Earth, I would say, that is worrying again. There's been a very wide number of accidents in the history of aviation, a bit less serious, fines, and more serious, including loss of aircraft, loss of life. And as I say, this kind of problem are increasing, and the company get more and more sensible to this, and they want to make sure their pilots are aware of their position and are able to navigate conventionally. Because on the line, there's very few opportunity to renew, to refresh your basic IFR knowledge. They want to have this knowledge acquired before. And as a matter of fact, that is required knowledge for your basic training. Good. I will now show you another picture just to confirm you why company I'm paying so much attention to this topic. And in this picture, you can simply see basically we were flying towards the Eastern Europe, and at some point the magenta line is a straight line and just go on the side, and I see the aircraft start turning on the side, and I say, well, this is curious. We have to fly for 1 hour on a straight line and we're actually turning. What we do, we go in heading select and we start investigating the problem. What we see in this picture is what we found out is that one of the FMS was completely out of the way, and unlikely. Well, we were so unlucky that the FMS, which was coupled to the autopilot, was actually the FMS which was drifting away. If you look at this picture, you got IRSs, VOR, and one of the FMS, which all coincide in position, and there's one FMS definitely drifting away. Luckily, we also get warned, so the actual navigation performance was actually out of limit. So we warn also this lack of performance. But again, in some cases, a pilot could say, okay, let's just hope for the best. Let's stay on the magenta line. If we would have been stayed on the magenta line, obviously, God knows where we would have ended up. So thankfully, we tuned in a VOR. We continued our navigation with a VOR, and we safely landed to our destination. But this is what every professional pilot would do, but unfortunately, as I said, there's been cases on history where this didn't happen, and that's what the company definitely doesn't want. Now, I'll take advantage to ask you to click on the bell and to subscribe to my channel. Why this? Well, there are other videos that we are planning to publish. Those videos concern pilot assessments, those videos concern the PBN, performance-based navigation, so get really into deep onto the detail. Well, when this video will come up, you'll find the link. I will put the link on this video, so you'll find the link here below. But at the moment we are publishing this video, PBN and pilot assessments is not edited. Why? Because we have limited resources. Now, your approval, your subscription, your like is what allow us to keep going on with this channel. So I really thank you for doing so. And at this stage, let's continue with our topic, which is intercepting radials. Good. So, what is the first item when I have to intercept a radial? Believe it or not, pilots tend to forget. Tune and identify. Now the question is, how many times your instructor told you tune and identify? I would say something between 1 million and 20 millions of time in just your training of 170 hours, guys. Seriously. Tuning and identified, believe it or not. Well, personally, I remember a record assessment day where I assessed 8 pilots, out of which 4, 50% of them, they screwed up the intercept because they did not tune and identify the correct radio aid. So tuning and identify, for how stupid it might be, it's a serious problem. Well, now let's spend a word about it. How should I tune and identify? Well, it depends from how the exercise is presented to you. It might be presented to you as a simple radial intercept, so that you already have a VOR tuned in and the instructor tell you, okay, intercept radial 220. Well, in this case, it is presumed that it's from the same VOR. But again, if you have an exercise like this, I can tell you it is very much appreciated from your instructor if once again you think about tune and identify. So your answer should be, okay, I will intercept radial 220 from Dublin VOR frequency 114.9 is tuned in on VHF nav 1, and I have Dublin VOR identified on the HSI. Well, these few words make you gain, I would say, 10,000 points on your assessment. Your assessor will be extremely happy to see that you are disciplined, that every time you are requested to intercept a radial, you first of all think about, did I tune and identify the correct nav aid, okay? Other thing is when you are reading an IFR chart, very often I see my student taking the IFR chart and reading everything is written on it, okay? So I take off, I follow this radial until this DME, then I turn to the right and follow another QD mic until another DME, and then turn to the left, and then, okay, they read all the chart from me, and my answer is thank you very much. I'm bad-sighted, so yes, I have difficulty in reading the chart, but I can do it by myself. Well, the purpose of the briefing is not you reading to me the chart. That is completely useless, guys. If you are at the end of your TPL, 180 hours, I presume that you know how to read the chart. I hope you were able to do that. Well, in the assessment, in the classroom, sitting on a desk, I could give you a chart and ask you a few details about the chart to see if you really know how to read the chart. But if you are sitting in the simulator, obviously that briefing is definitely incorrect. So the correct way to do the briefing would be rather taking the chart and reading every radial and distance for that departure or for that arrival. And every time you have a VOR, you stop reading and you go onto your VHF nav and verify that that frequency is tuned. And then you read again on the chart the VOR identifier. You go on the automatic identifier on board your aircraft, or you just select the audio for the manual identification of the Morse code and you verify that the identifier is correctly there. And then you continue on another course, and so you stop there because that is a course and that has to be set on the course selector if your aircraft is fitted with an OBI or an HSI. So basically everything which is a radial, an NDB, a QD mic, QD Romeo, well, everything has to be set. And in the briefing, what I would like to hear is that you verify that everything is set and you explain to me if there is something that will have to be set later on, for example, switching a nav aid or changing a course, well, that you brief to me how you intend to proceed. When will you ask me to change the nav aid? Will you ask me to set a new course? And I honestly realized that very often pilots get to the end of the training and they can't really plan, they can't really organize the work this way. They can't manage the thinking, well, what do I set on course number 1? What do I set on course number 2? And of course, if you go for an assessment and you have this kind of problem, well, your assessor will not be that happy. Good. Let's now get to the heart of the matter. Why pilot and how pilots screw up the interception of radial? Well, in my experience, I found out that very often one of the reasons, so 50% of the reasons, so we're talking of in total something around 1/6 of chances, so 12.5% chances of failing the assessment. Well, this is due to the fact that the pilot does not know what the terminology is concerning radio navigation. And this is, I would say, even more silly, because pilots should know what a radial is, should know what a course is, and should know what a QD Mike, QD Romeo is. Unfortunately, it turns out that pilots doesn't know. And I tell you, very often, when I fly with a pilot and I start smelling, maybe in the previous session, there was something wrong there, okay? On the following briefing, I briefing on this terminology thing, and very often the pilot is looking at me like, yeah, do you think I'm stupid, because this terminology seems to be evident to everyone, but actually very often it turns out that it's not. So you must have an absolute clear idea of what every single terms mean, and not just, that it takes 5 minutes thinking about before getting an answer. Why this? Because a professional pilot has to be able to communicate with everyone. So I could be asking you a radial intercept in the term intercept radial number. I could be asking you a radial intercept in the terms of intercept QD Mike or intercept QD Romeo and a number. Or I could be asking you radial intercept in the terms of courses, intercept course to or course from. As a matter of fact, in the United States, they're going to be using bearing very often. This is actually was decided later on that the word bearing is not appropriate for the VOR. As a matter of fact, on board the aircraft, you have the OBI, omnidirectional bearing selector, and the OBI, this allow you to select a bearing. As a matter of fact, at the time it was invented, they didn't know that bearing was inappropriate for VORs, but the usage of bearing actually doesn't change a lot from course. So let's get now onto my website so that I can show you a little bit in detail what I'm talking about.
As you can see, obviously on the first line that we have here on top, you see there is a VOR and DB, and you see that we have two radial, the radial 090 going in one direction and radial 270 going in the other direction. So there's no no science about behind this about this. What is important to note is that when we talk about radials, actually, we don't really talk about a track to be flown by the aircraft. When we talk about radial, we talk about a line of position. Talking about radial does not imply the fact that the aircraft should fly outbound or should fly inbound. It could be just crossing a radial. Then we go with the terminology of course and bearings. Here it gets a little bit more difficult because the Americans use the bearing as if it be the course. So the bearing is actually used as a general word and not as really its GNAV definition, okay? But nevertheless, we decided bearing cannot be used on VOR. So apart from the OBI, you should never use the word bearing when you talk about a VOR, okay? Some of you could say, yes, but this is incorrect. So saying that the course 090 inbound and course 090 outbound are exactly equal to the bearing 090 inbound, bearing 090 outbound. Yes, it's true. It is somehow incorrect because if you take the GNAV definition of the bearing, we would have to take this aircraft that I'm drawing now and say which bearing is he. You would have to measure the angle between the north and the needle that indicates the station, and you would find out that this aircraft is actually on bearing 270. But that is what we would call what is the bearing to the station. So the GNAV, the theoretical definition of bearing, is a bearing to the station, okay? This is not the case in the common use that we do of the word bearing. So if we go taking the chart, this aircraft that I'm drawing now, flying away of the NDB, this aircraft is on bearing 090 from. This is the common use. In fact, I clear all this drawing, here we go, and just switch the tab. Here, taking a chart, okay? The one you see on the right is a departure from, is an old departure actually from Ciampino, where you can clearly see the aircraft is flying 338 to an NDB, and then it flies 187 to another NDB, which is Papa Romeo Alpha. If I go in the description underneath, I find out that
Papa Romeo Alpha 5 Bravo running 33 Champino. After the NDB, we intercept 187 bearing 2 Papa Romeo Alpha. So that is bearing 2, that is correct. Let's give a look to the PMAR 5 Alpha. When we see that PMAR 5 Alpha, after Papa Romeo Bravo, we turn left and intercept 080 bearing from Papa Romeo Alpha. Okay, so it's a bearing from. So as I just said, that is the common use that we do of the word bearing. And of course, when an assessor will ask you to intercept a bearing, you will lose the common usage of the terminology. So it could use the bearing to or the bearing from, as it is on this chart. Okay, let's get back to our chart. So we said course 0 and 0 is exactly the same of bearing 0 and 0, that is outbound and inbound. It's worth noticing, obviously, that when we talk about course 0 and 0 inbound, we're actually talking of radial 270. So it is radial 270 flown to the station. Okay, if I get there on the next part of this slide of this screen, I see QD mic 0 and 0, QD Romeo 0 and 0. Of course, QD mic is to the station, QD Romeo is from the station, and again, the two are equal to the course. The only thing is that the course, it's the old line through the VOR, so it's the section from and the section to, and the QD mic is just the section to, and the QD Romeo is just the section from. Okay. Now, going from one terminology to the other, as I say, very often I see my students say, yeah, this is evident, but then we get to the simulator. I ask for a QD mic and I see the course set on the incorrect course, or I ask for a radial and I see again the course set incorrect course, or I see intercepting the opposite radial. So this is very common. So you should be perfectly capable of managing any request. So if I ask you, okay, intercept radial 270 to the station, you should be immediately be capable of saying, okay, radial 270 to the station, it is QD mic 0 and 0, it is course 0 and 0 to the station. Okay, you should be absolutely familiar with this terminology. You shouldn't have any difficulty, because the day you're going to do the assessment, you don't know what kind of terminology your assessor is going to be using. Okay, good. At the end of this screen, you can see there is one pilot over 4 will fail in this terminology. So this terminology is an old story. It's going on since a long time. And you see that when I was younger and I prepared this screen, I found that was the number 1 over 4. So that you can see that the situation is actually getting worse, because what I'm saying today to you is 1 over 3. What we record today is 1 over 3. So basically, yes, just because of terminology, you could scrap your radial intercept. Let's get back to our full screen. Yes, there is something else actually I wanted to show you. Let's go back to the share screen again. This is about, yes, also terminology concerning radial intercept. In this SED, as you can see, we fly radial 331 from a VOR to the 244 inbound the other VOR, Oscar Sierra Tango. Let's go and look what the terminology is. As you can see, the Ostia 5 Echo, we intercept radial 331, so this is defined as a radial 331, okay, to the ME4, and then we turn left, intercept the radial 064 inbound. So that you see that the terminology radial 064 inbound is still used, but yes, what you see on the chart up there indeed is the course 244, or the QD mic, call it as you want. So you should be absolutely capable of translating from this radial 064 to the QD mic 244, okay, without any difficulty. Again, on this SED, it might eventually happen that I see pilot setting the course of 064, which is absolutely incorrect, because the autopilot would go and turn the opposite direction, okay? So all I wanted to say actually about terminology. So that's quite easy, okay? There's no surprise behind, but surprisingly, I see pilots still having difficulties in clarifying and understanding the terminology. Now, before we got to the end of this terminology issue, there is one thing I would like to talk about, which is about the holding, but the holdings are not really part of this video. There might be a video in the future coming up eventually, but not really talking about this. But I just want to take the board because it's again a very common mistake among pilots. Okay, so what I'm drawing here is an holding. Okay, this is the inbound leg. The holding end up over a station, and then it turns left. Okay, so this is the holding. Yeah, very often when there are some holding, sorry for the drawing, is not perfect, but very often when we get to the holding, there is a problem of terminology depending on the European and American terminology. Now, in the European terminology, so the way you should hear this holding defined in Europe, so what you should hear at the moment of the assessment, given the fact that your assessor most likely is a European pilot and it's a professional pilot, well, it should tell to you that this holding will be like hold, let's give a name to the viewer, well, let's call it Oscar Sierra Tango viewer, okay, and that will be at 090 inbound with left turns. Okay, so this is how the hold is defined in Europe. Be careful because in the United States, this holding will be defined completely different. You see that we are using that 090 is the course inbound. So we hold course 090 inbound the station with left turn. In the US, they would say, they will start the same way, hold, okay, Oscar Sierra Tango, but before Oscar Sierra Tango, that is what rings the bell, it would be west, okay? Hold west of Oscar Sierra Tango, and that should ring the bell to you that this is an American guy. And then it will give you the radial, so it will tell you radial 270 left turns, okay? So this is the holding as defined by an American guy. So if you hear this west, this should ring the bell because this guy is giving you the radial. Now what happens is that everyone has his own method to enter the holding. The whole method will rely exactly on these numbers, you know, on this 090, 270. But if there is confusion, is this guy telling me a course inbound or is this guy telling me a radial? If there is confusion, of course, your method is not going to work perfectly. So beware also of this, of those differences. And honestly, the terminology, it's a very easy thing, but as I say, there is a very large number of failures on the terminology. Good.
Well, before we go any forward, let's give a word about the main sponsor, which is the Aviomar Fly Academy. Just 1 minute and stay tuned. We'll keep talking about our radial intercept.
Welcome to Aviomar Flight Academy, a selected training partner of Ryanair for the provision of highly qualified and skilled pilots to the airline. Our industry-leading APS-MCC course has been developed to provide future Ryanair pilots with the skills and competencies as required by the airline to commence the type rating on the Boeing 737-800 aircraft. This course is entirely held in our Rome Training Center, where 2 state-of-the-art Boeing 737 simulators are located.
You will acquire competence to work in multi-crew environment practicing task and CRM exercises. Unlike a standard MCC course, you will become competent in managing sequences of actions and more complicated systems are presented on a line aircraft. Ultimately, only in the Ryanair mentorate APS MCC, the focus will be on the skills and competence required to meet the company standards and successfully complete the subsequent type rating online training.
Our training is conducted by instructors with direct Ryanair operational experience.
The standard of the simulator used in our Ryanair mentored APS MCC course is specified to support that the training provided represents the real airline standard aircraft. The course is structured in a way to address areas where pilot can be weak during an airline assessment and to easily adapt to a modern airline working environment.
The extra emphasis on the core competencies, manual handling, airline standard simulators, and instructors will provide students with outstanding preparation for their upcoming assessment. Students will be exposed to Ryanair's safety culture and operational philosophy from day one of the program, in addition to having an exclusive access to a fast-track recruitment process. Program graduates will enjoy a distinctive advantage at the actual interview and assessment stage. Why choose?
Every time I brief my student on these items, I see them being like this, saying, yeah, we know it, it's evident, of course. It seems very simple. Then we get into the simulator and all mess come out of it. So, well, will you be trapped in this terminology problem? Let's make a test and see if you can get the answer. You got 3 seconds, because that is the time you have available. You don't have to waste time. You must have an immediate answer to the question. A professional pilot shouldn't have any doubt about terminology for radio. So let's take an example, okay? I tell you, let's intercept radial 099 inbound. What QD Mike, QD Romeo? What course is it? Well, I'm looking at the chart of the Saronno 6 Delta, and as you can see, the radial 099 is what defined on the chart, and it's QD Mike 279, course 279 to Saronno DOR. Did you have it right? Well, let's try another one then. I ask you, QD Mike 306. What course is it? What radial is it? Well, actually, I'm looking at the Oswald 1 Bravo, so talking about radial, that will be incorrect, because that is an NDB, so radial wording cannot be used on the NDB, as we just said, but the tail of the needle should be on the number 126, so we can say it's radial 126. QD Mike, it's bearing inbound, in this case, it's not course. The course, of course, is not going to be working, but it's bearing inbound, of course, 306, so exactly the same number, QD Mike 306, course 306. Well, let's take another example now. I'm asking you to intercept the bearing 002 to the station. What course is it? What radial is it? Well, in this case, I'm looking at the Genova 1 Delta, so it's NDB and VOR, so we can use all terminology as long as we tune in the correct station and ADF or VOR. The bearing 002 to the station, as you can see, it's course 002 inbound the station, it's QD Mike 002 and it's radial 182. Well, we can have another one. If I ask you to leave an NDB on bearing 175, is it a QD Mike, QD Romeo? What would be the radial, if we can call it so? Good, I'm looking at the Limba 5 Charlie, and we have obviously QD Romeo 175. That would be, again, the terminology radial is incorrect, but that would be radial 175. So the tail of the needle must stay on the 175. So all these might be examples, and as I said, this terminology problem might be brought up to the line. And as I said, you just take a chance, because you cannot know what terminology is the assessor going to use. Could it be QD Mike, QD Romeo? Could it be courses? Could it be bearings? Could it be radials? As I said, you just take a chance. If you are in the habit of using the same terminology, lucky day. But again, professional pilots should be able to move from one terminology to the other. So don't get trapped in this lack of knowledge. As I say, one of the two of the reasons why pilots screw up an intercept is because they don't understand what the examiner, what the assessor is asking him. Alright, as we say today, one of the main reasons why pilots have problem in the assessment is radial intercept. One pilot over 3 will have a problem with basic IFR intercepting radial, and we say that among this one pilot over 3, 50% of those pilots, so it means that 1 chance over 6, that the reason why the problem of intercepting the radial occur is because this pilot either simply didn't tune and identify, or either he does not manage the terminology correctly. So he does not understand what the assessor is asking us. Well, at this point, we reached the end of today's video, the end of part 1. There is a part 2 coming out, and it's nearly ready at this stage. It will be out in approximately 1 week, 10 days. As I said before, I really appreciate the fact that you subscribe and put a like on the video. This gives us the possibility to have more production in video. So I would like to thank you for the moment for your attention, and see you very soon with this training. It will be on the practical training on the techniques to be used when you want to intercept a radial. Stay tuned.